And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather showing rain on the increase here along the North Gulf Coast and across southern Alaska, extending down near the low center over the Alaska Peninsula. Dry in the central interior, risk of some areas of light snow and flurries up to the north there. Dry for the southeast coast. Next system spreading moisture up into the central Aleutians tomorrow as it tracks eastward, with the low center staying south of the chain. Nice break for the eastern Aleutians and again on up to the Pribilof Islands. Chance of light snow showers or flurries from the Bering Strait up into the Arctic coast tomorrow. Maybe mostly sunny day here in the central interior areas with rain and clouds, and temperatures in the 40s and 50s across southern Alaska. Partly sunny for the southeast coast with light winds. And then this front weakens and moves in as a trough, but that stays together enough to bring cloudy skies in. Areas of light rain and showers across all the Panhandle. North Gulf Coast stays damp and unsettled. Scattered showers, mostly cloudy. South central Alaska, Susitna Valley, and cloudy skies with areas of light rain and showers over much of the southeast quarter of the state, with some flurries up along the North Slope and Arctic coast. Increasing clearing here and dry conditions out to the west, down into Bristol Bay, southern Kodiak Island. Rain for the Fox Islands and Alaska Peninsula. For tonight, or for tomorrow, for the south coast of the Panhandle, west winds 10 knots there along Prince of Wales Island. Central coast south winds 10 to 15 knots. And east-southeast winds 25 to 35 knots here for the north coast. Lynn Canal, northwesterlies at 10 knots tomorrow. Stevens Passage, north at 10. Seas around 2 feet in both those locations. Southeast winds 15 knots for Clarence Strait with 3-foot seas. And for Sunday here on the north coast, winds come down out of the southeast, 15 to 20 knots. South winds 15 to 20 knots on the central coast. And south to southwest winds 15 to 20 knots for the south coast. Inside waters and channels here, all pretty much southeast at 20 knots with seas running 3 to 4 feet, except up to 7 feet for Clarence Strait. North Gulf Coast tomorrow on the east side here, especially around Middleton Island, east winds 40 knots. East winds 30 knots for Prince William Sound with seas up to 7 feet. East at 30 for the western North Gulf Coast with 14-foot seas. Barren Islands, light variable winds at 10 knots. East at 20 for the Kamishak Bay area. Cook Inlet, small craft advisories. North to northeast winds, possibly as high as 30 knots with seas possibly as high as 8 feet. And then for Sunday, west winds 10 to 15 knots here for Cook Inlet, west at 15 for Kamishak Bay. Those winds turn northwest and pick up to about 20 knots. Not too bad for the Barren Islands, seas at about 6 feet. East to northeast winds 15 knots there for the North Gulf Coast. Prince William Sound winds east at 15 knots and those seas back down to 2 feet. Kodiak Island, variable winds 10 to 15 knots for Saturday. Variable at 15 for Bristol Bay. For the Alaska Peninsula, west-northwest winds, 20 to 30 knots. And for Sunday, for the peninsula, variable to northwest winds at 10 to 15 knots, west 15 for Bristol Bay. Kodiak Island, west-southwest wind, 15 knots, seas 3 to 6 feet. And for Unalaska Island tomorrow, northwest winds 25 to 30 knots. Otherwise, for Adak and Atka, east winds 20 to 25 knots. And those east winds continue out to about Kiska, then turn northeast at 20 to 25 knots. And then for Sunday, west winds 25 knots from Shimia to Kiska, and Chitka Island north at 20 to 25 knots. Adak and Atka, north winds 25 knots. And for the eastern Aleutians, north to northwest winds 20 to 25 knots. Southwest coast tomorrow, north winds 20 to 25 knots with seas 2 to 4 feet. Northwest at 20 for St. Lawrence Island. Norton Sound, north winds at 20 knots. That same forecast good for St. Matthew, St. George, and St. Paul Island. And then for Sunday, Norton Sound, Yukon Delta Coast, St. Lawrence Island, north winds 15 knots. Kuskokwim Delta Coast, northwest at 20 knots, north at 20 for the Pribilofs, northwest winds 20 knots for St. Matthew Island. And for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, east to northeast winds only at about 15 knots. Variable to south winds at about 10 there for the central coast. Light west winds 5 to 10 knots for the western Arctic coast and the Chukchi Sea winds northwest 10 to 15. No change on Sunday here for the Chukchi Sea. Northwest winds 10 to 15 knots. And for the remainder of the Arctic coast, winds mostly west or northwest at about 10 knots.